In 1996, Pokémon Red and Green launched in Japan with exactly 151 creatures, but hidden in the game's code, tucked away in unused sprite data and mysterious index numbers, lies evidence of a larger world, one that never made it to our Game Boys. The story of what got cut from Generation 1 is more complicated than you might think. While the exact number of originally planned Pokémon remains a subject of debate among fans and researchers, we know with certainty that several designs were abandoned, evolved into different creatures, or saved for later generations. Today, we're diving into the confirmed cases, the Pokémon that almost were, the first Pokémon ever created. Before we talk about what was cut, let's talk about what came first. According to multiple interviews with Game Freak staff, Rhydon holds the distinction of being the very first Pokémon ever designed. Ken Sugimori created Rhydon's sprite before any other creature, which explains a curious detail longtime fans might have noticed. Statues resembling Rhydon appear in various Pokémon centers and gyms throughout Kanto. These weren't random decorations, they were placeholders from early development that the team liked enough to keep. Rhydon's index number in the game's code is 001, despite Bulbasaur being number 001 in the Pokédex. This discrepancy reveals how the internal development order differed from the final marketing presentation. The team designed Pokémon as they came up with ideas, then organized them later into the Pokédex order we know today. Gorochu, Raichu's lost evolution. Perhaps the most famous cut Pokémon is Gorochu, a third evolution in the Pikachu line that would have come after Raichu. In a 2018 interview, Game Freak's Atsuko Nishida revealed that Gorochu was designed and fully conceptualized, but ultimately removed from the final game. The design featured longer horns and prominent fangs, giving Raichu's evolution a more aggressive, powerful appearance. According to Nishida, Gorochu was cut primarily due to game balance concerns and cartridge space limitations. The original Game Boy cartridge held only 1 MB of data, forcing the team to make difficult choices about what could fit. Gorochu's removal had significant implications. Had it remained, Pikachu's line would have been the only 3-stage evolution among the special gift Pokémon, potentially making it even more central to the game's identity than it already became. Instead, Pikachu evolved once into Raichu and stopped there, creating the iconic duo we know today. The decision to cut Gorochu demonstrates one of Game Freak's core design principles. Sometimes less is more. By keeping Pikachu's evolution simple, they maintained the character's appeal and prevented power creep that might have made early game balance problematic. MissingNo, the accidental Pokémon. No discussion of Generation 1's mysteries would be complete without MissingNo, the glitch Pokémon that became a legend in its own right. Contrary to popular belief, Missing Numbers wasn't a deleted Pokémon. It's what happens when the game tries to load data from empty index slots. Here's how it works. Pokémon Red and Blue store encounter data in specific memory locations. When players perform the Old Man glitch by watching the catching tutorial in Viridian City, then immediately flying to Cinnabar Island and surfing along the eastern coast, the game reads the player's name as encounter data. Because certain named characters correspond to empty Pokémon index numbers, the game displays missing numbers, literally missing number. MissingNo appears as a glitchy, scrambled sprite because the game is pulling graphical data from unintended memory locations. Its various forms, the famous backward L shape, the Kabutops skeleton, the ghost, are all different manifestations of the same error occurring under different conditions. What makes Missing Number fascinating isn't that it's a cut Pokémon, but that it accidentally reveals how Game Freak structured their data. Those empty index numbers exist because the team planned for more Pokémon during development, but ultimately didn't fill every slot. MissingNo is like finding the foundation of a house that was never built, baby Pokémon that came later. Several Pokémon introduced in Generation 2 were actually conceptualized during Generation 1's development, but held back for the sequel. While we can't definitively prove which specific baby Pokémon were planned for Red and Blue versus designed fresh for Gold and Silver, evidence suggests some pre-evolutions existed in early planning stages. Pichu, Cleffa, Igglybuff, and Togepi were among the first baby Pokémon introduced in Generation 2. According to Junichi Masuda in various interviews, The breeding mechanic itself was discussed during Red and Blue's development but couldn't be implemented due to technical limitations and time constraints. The Game Boy's limited processing power made real-time breeding calculations difficult to implement smoothly. By Generation 2, with improved hardware in the Game Boy Color and more development experience, Game Freak successfully implemented breeding and introduced baby Pokémon to populate that system. These pre-evolutions added depth to existing evolutionary lines, giving players new ways to connect with familiar species. The decision to delay baby Pokémon until Generation 2 proved wise from a design perspective. It gave Gold and Silver a significant new feature to promote, while avoiding bloating Red and Blue with mechanics that might have felt half-baked given the hardware constraints. Version exclusives, encouraging trade. One of Pokémon's most brilliant design decisions was making certain creatures exclusive to specific versions, forcing players to trade if they wanted to complete their Pokédex. This wasn't about cutting content, it was about building community. In Pokémon Red, players could catch Ekans and its evolution Arbok, Oddish and its evolution line, Mankey and Primeape, Growlithe and Arcanine, Scyther and Electabuzz. Meanwhile, Pokémon Blue and Green in Japan featured Sandshrew and Sandslash, Vulpix and Ninetales, Meowth and Persian, Bellsprout and its evolution line, Magmar and Pinsir. These exclusives were carefully chosen to maintain balance between versions. Both versions had access to powerful Pokémon, ensuring neither felt objectively superior. A Red player's Arcanine was roughly equivalent to a Blue player's Ninetales. Electabuzz and Magmar formed a natural counterpart pair, both being single-stage evolutions with similar stat distributions. The starter Pokémon, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, were available in all versions, but players could only choose one per playthrough. This forced even solo players to either replay the game or trade with friends to obtain all three starters, creating natural opportunities for player interaction. Interestingly, the legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, appeared in all versions. Game Freak wanted these powerful mythical creatures to be accessible to everyone, regardless of which version they purchased. This design choice emphasized that version exclusives were about common Pokémon variety, not gating the most exciting content behind specific purchases. Unused type combinations. Data miners examining Generation 1's code have discovered unused type combinations that suggest Game Freak experimented with unusual pairings before settling on the final roster. While we don't have specific Pokémon designs for all these combinations, the code reveals spaces where certain type pairings could have existed. One notable absence from Generation 1 is a pure flying type Pokémon. Every flying type in the original 151 has a secondary type, normal flying like Pidgey, bug flying like Butterfree, or fire flying like Moltres. The code supports pure flying types, but none were implemented. This gap wouldn't be filled until Generation 5 with Tornadus. Similarly, ghost types were severely limited in Generation 1. Only the Ghastly evolution line existed, and they were Ghost Poison, not pure Ghost. The type matchup chart included Ghost type interactions, suggesting the developers anticipated more Ghost Pokémon, but ultimately created only one line. This scarcity made Ghost types feel genuinely rare and mysterious, which may have been intentional. Dragon types faced similar scarcity, with only the Dratini line and Dragonite representing the type. No Dragon type moves existed except Dragon Rage, which dealt fixed damage, and the TM move Dragon Rage. This limited implementation suggests Dragon types were meant to be legendary tier rare, foreshadowing their role in later generations. Beta Sprite discoveries. In 2018 and 2019, major data breaches leaked Game Freak's internal development materials, including beta sprites from Pokémon Gold and Silver's development. While these sprites are primarily Generation New content, they reveal design philosophies that carried over from Generation 1's development. The leaked sprites show that many Pokémon went through radical design changes between conception and release. Beta Wooper, for instance, was originally more slug-like and less cute. Beta Girafarig was more menacing, with its tail being a full secondary head, rather than the simplified version in the final game. These leaks confirm that Game Freak's design process involves creating dozens of concepts, then refining them based on gameplay needs, hardware limitations, and aesthetic consistency. Not every interesting design makes the cut, sometimes because it doesn't fit the game's tone, sometimes because it's too similar to existing Pokémon, and sometimes simply because there's limited space. The Space World 1997 demo, a playable beta version of Pokémon Gold and Silver shown at a Japanese trade show, contained numerous beta Pokémon that never made it to the final games. While this is technically Generation 2 content, it demonstrates that the cutting process didn't end with Red and Blue. Game Freak continued to add, remove, and redesign Pokémon right up until each game's release. The Capsule Monsters prototype. Before Pokémon had its final name, the project was called Capsule Monsters, inspired by Japanese gas-shaping machines that dispense toys in small capsules. Early design documents from this era show creature concepts that look radically different from the polished Pokémon we eventually got. According to Satoshi Tajiri in various interviews, the core concept, collecting creatures and trading them via link cable, remained consistent throughout development, but individual creature designs evolved significantly. Some early capsule monsters were more realistic-looking animals, while others were abstract shapes that would have felt out of place in the final game. The transition from capsule monsters to pocket monsters, Pokémon, involved refining the aesthetic to appeal to a broader audience. Creatures became cuter, more colorful, and more distinct from real-world animals. This shift explained why early concepts that were too realistic or too abstract got replaced with the balanced designs we see in the final 151. Technical limitations shaped the final roster. Understanding what got cut from Generation 1 requires understanding the Game Boy's severe technical limitations. The entire game, all 151 Pokémon, every town, every battle, every line of dialogue, had to fit into approximately 1 megabyte of cartridge space. For comparison, a single high-resolution photo on your phone is typically 5 megabytes. Game Freak had to fit an entire RPG into half of that. This constraint forced brutal efficiency in every aspect of development. Pokémon sprites were tiny and low resolution to save space. Move animations were minimal. Towns reused graphical tiles extensively. Even Pokémon cries were carefully designed to be short audio clips that could be pitched up or down to create variety without storing unique sounds for each creature. When deciding which Pokémon to cut, the team had to consider not just the creature's sprite, but its cry, its stats, its move pool, its evolutionary requirements, and how it fit into the game's encounter tables. Adding one more Pokémon meant removing something else or simplifying existing content. This explains why certain Pokémon lines are surprisingly simple. Magnemite evolves once into Magneton, which is literally 3 Magnemites stuck together, a design choice that saved sprite memory by reusing existing assets. Dugtrio similarly reuses Diglett's design. These weren't lazy choices, they were clever solutions to severe memory constraints. Pokémon that almost had different evolutions. Evidence in the game's code suggests several Pokémon were originally planned to evolve differently. Shellder and Cloyster, for instance, have unused evolution data that hints at alternate evolution methods beyond the Water Stone. Dragonite presents an interesting case. Its pre-evolutions, Dratini and Dragonair, are sleek, serpentine creatures, but Dragonite suddenly becomes a chubby, orange dragon with wings. This radical design shift has fueled fan speculation that Dragonite was originally meant to evolve from a different line, or that Dragonair was supposed to evolve into something else entirely. While Game Freak has never officially confirmed this theory, the design inconsistency stands out compared to other evolution lines, which maintain clearer visual continuity. It's possible that late in development, evolution paths were reshuffled to better balance the game, leaving Dragonite as an outlier. Why these cuts matter. Understanding what was cut from Pokémon Red and Blue isn't just trivia, it reveals the design philosophy that made the franchise successful. Game Freak prioritized quality over quantity, cutting content that didn't meet their standards rather than shipping everything they'd conceptualized. This approach created a tight, balanced game where every Pokémon felt purposeful. Unlike later generations that sometimes included creatures that felt like filler, the original 151 each had a clear role. Water types dominated certain routes. Fire types were rare to encourage trading. Psychic types were powerful but limited in availability. The cuts also demonstrate that game development is an iterative process. Not every good idea makes it into the final product. Sometimes the best decision is to save a concept for later, as happened with baby Pokémon and breeding mechanics. Other times, the best decision is to let an idea go entirely, as with Gorochu. By examining what didn't make it into Generation 1, we gain appreciation for what did. Those 151 Pokémon weren't randomly selected. They were carefully curated to create a balanced, engaging world that would capture imaginations worldwide. The legacy of Generation 1's design. The decisions made during Generation 1's development established principles that guide Pokémon games to this day. Version exclusives remained a staple feature, encouraging trade and cooperation. The balance between cute and cool designs set the aesthetic template for all future Pokémon. The mix of common and rare creatures created a sense of discovery and accomplishment. Even the cuts themselves influenced later games. Baby Pokémon cut from Generation 1 became a selling point for Generation 2. Type combinations left unexplored in Red and Blue became opportunities for innovation in future generations. The unused index numbers that created MissingNo taught Game Freak valuable lessons about data management and error handling. In a sense, what was cut from Generation 1 is as important as what made it in. The empty spaces in the code represent potential, ideas waiting to be refined, concepts that needed more time, designs that would eventually find their place in the ever-expanding Pokémon universe. The original 151 Pokémon succeeded not despite the cuts, but because of them. By being selective, by prioritizing quality and balance, Game Freak created something that felt complete rather than bloated. And 30 years later, those 151 creatures remain the most iconic, most recognizable, and most beloved generation in the entire franchise. The Pokémon that were cut from Generation 1 are ghosts in the machine, traces of what could have been, preserved in unused code and developer interviews. They remind us that every finished game is the result of countless decisions, compromises, and cuts, and sometimes what you leave out is just as important as what you include.